disposition to act justly toward them, he being the one on whom the governor relies for all information regarding their conduct. It is on the reports of the chief warder that the governor acts in all cases involving their promotion, reprimands, or fines, and their application for leave of absence must be approved of and signed by him. It is clear that unless he is very straight in the performance of his duties, he would soon place himself in the power of some of the warders, who would not fail to take advantage of any knowledge of his derelictions to benefit themselves, and to the detriment of discipline and good order. Under the English government, the salary of a man possessing these superior qualifications is between $500 and $600 a year, and his uniform. This is of blue cloth. The sleeves and collar of his coat and his cap embroidered with gold lace. On alternate days at the prison where I was confined, he came on duty at 5 a.m. in summer and 5:30 in winter, and left the prison at 4 p.m., leaving in charge a principal warder, coming on duty the following morning at 7 a.m. at 6 o'clock p.m. After receiving the reports from the ward officers, stating the number of prisoners each has just locked up, and thus seeing that all are safe, he locks with his master key the gates and outer doors of the main buildings, and before finally retiring for the night, he must lock the outer gate, so that no one but the governor can get in or out, each watchman being locked into the ward which he is set to guard. There are bells in his room connecting with the various wards, and in case of sickness or any other emergency, he is the man who is aroused. It is the chief warder who keeps everything connected with the prison in running order, and whatever goes wrong the cry is for the chief, and he is sent for, be it day or night. In a large establishment, there are a dozen or more principal warders. These are the lieutenants of the chief, and have general supervision of the working parties. Their pay is about $400 a year in uniforms. There are of the other two grades, warders and assistant warders, from 2,000 to 3,000 employed in all Her Majesty's prisons in Great Britain and Ireland. Warders and assistant warders are provided with a short, heavy truncheon, which each carries in his hand or in a leather sheath which hangs from his belt, to which is also attached a sort of cartouch box in which he keeps the keys, which are fastened to a chain, the other end to his belt. When about to leave the prison on going off duty, he must hang up the belt and attachments in the chief warder's office. Their pay, besides uniforms, which are of blue cloth, is $350 a year for warders and $300 for assistant warders. All promotions are by seniority. In case of transfer by authorities to any other prison, they retain their position in the line of promotion. But if they volunteer or make application to be transferred, they have to begin at the bottom in reckoning the length of service for promotion. When the authorities wish to transfer warders, it is usual for them to call for volunteers, of whom they find a sufficient number anxious for a change, unless the transfer is to an unpopular station, such as Dartmoor, which is among the bogs, and a lonely, bleak place. They do it differently in China. They don't use straight jackets in Persia. Warders are exempted from doing night duty, which is all done by the assistant warders, who are on that service 1 week out of 3. Although when on night duty they had the day for sleep and recreation, I never saw one who did not detest it, because they must remain on duty continuously for 12 hours, and must not read, sit down, nor lean against anything, nor have their hands behind them. These military regulations apply as well to the whole time they are on duty in the prison, day or night. A few years ago, the time of daily duty was reduced to 12 hours, with 1 hour at noon for dinner. Besides this, at times they must do a good deal of extra duty. Each is allowed 10 days annual holiday, but is frequently obliged to take it piecemeal, a day or two at a time, so that he cannot go far away from the scene of his servitude. Their duties require unflagging attention and never-ceasing vigilance, which must be a heavy tax on the brain, and the 12 hours must be passed in standing or walking about. In fact, they are subjected to military discipline, or rather despotism, and any known infraction of the rules subjects them to penalties according to the nature of the offense. Leaning against a wall, sitting down, etc. For first offense, they are mulcted in a small sum, 12 to 60 cents, usually, and are put back in the line of promotion. The fines go to the officer's library fund. I knew one officer, Joseph Matthews, who had been assistant warder 20 years, and being frequently set back for doing some small favor to prisoners, was discharged from the service in 1886 without a pension for some slight breach of regulations. He had a wife and 6 children and had worked 20 years for less than $7 per week. For giving a convict a small bit of tobacco, a heavy fine, suspension, and in case it was not the first offense, expulsion from the service without a pension. For acting the go-between and facilitating correspondence with the friends of convicts, expulsion, possibly imprisonment. One of the assistant warders, who was convicted of having received a bribe of £100 from one of us at Newgate, was expelled from the service and imprisoned 18 months. Another at Portsmouth Prison underwent the same fate, save that his term was but 6 months, for sending and receiving letters for a prisoner, and similar cases are of frequent occurrence. The warders and assistant warders are the ones who come in direct and constant contact with prisoners, and when the eye of no superior authority is on them, or nothing else to deter, they are hail fellow well met with such of the convicts as are unprincipled enough to curry favor with, and assist them in covering up their peccadilloes from their superiors. They naturally recoil at the hardness and parsimony of the government toward them, evading the performance of duties when they can. And I have heard more than one say, "Why should we care what prisoners do, so long as we don't get into trouble? The government grinds us down to 12 hours daily duty on just pay enough to keep body and soul together. Then if we complain, tells us that we can leave if we like, as there are others ready to step into our places. Bah, what do we care for the government? It is of no benefit to us. The big guns get big pay. And the higher up the office, the more the pay and the less the work. To be sure, we can go out of the prison to sleep, but otherwise we are bound as closely as you are. Yet these very warders, the moment any superior authority appears on the scene, are as obsequious and fawning as whipped dogs, and recoup themselves for this forced humiliation by taking it out of such of the convicts as fail to curry their favor, or offend, or make them trouble. Surely their office is a very responsible one, and it is blind. False economy to retain low-priced men in such a position. The present English system of penal servitude is perfect on paper, but the moral qualities of most of the warders and assistant warders preclude all possibility of the reformation of those in their charge. Notwithstanding the expositions of the English delegates at the international meetings, prison reform has never yet been tried in Great Britain and Ireland. In other words, all efforts in that direction have been defeated by placing convicts in the immediate charge of a class of men who, by education and training, possess none of the qualifications requisite for such a responsible position. In so far as forms are concerned, the business of the prison is carried on most systematically. There are blank forms which cover everything, from provisioning the prison to bathing the men, and these must be filled in and signed by the warder in charge of the particular work being done. For example, every week he must fill in the proper form and certify that every man in his ward has had a bath. I have known men to go unbathed for many months, simply because they did not wish to bathe, and it saved the warder trouble. Nearly all others in the ward only bathed about once a month, and yet at the stated times the officer filled up and signed the form, certifying to the superior authorities that those in his ward had been bathed at the regulation times. A great majority of the officers are soldiers who have been invalided or pensioned off after doing the full term for which they enlisted. 12 years, and of sailors in the same condition. In order to encourage enlistment into the Army and Navy, the government gives discharged soldiers and sailors the preference in the civil service, apparently heedless as to their moral qualifications. Indeed, it would be difficult, if not impossible, to ascertain about these, for the very nature and present requirements of these services tend to harden and make men conscienceless, subservient and fawning toward their superiors, and tyrannical to those in their power. As to those in the prison service, there are many who would be good men in a situation suited to their acquirements, and there are but a few of those who are brought into immediate contact with the men, who, in fact, virtually hold the power of life and death over them, whose influence is of an elevating or reforming kind. Indeed, I have heard many of them telling or exchanging obscene stories with prisoners, and using the vilest language and bandying thieves' slang, in which they become proficient. I am bold to say that at least one half of all I have known are in morals on a level with the average prisoner, or, as I have heard more than one assistant warder say, too much of a coward to steal, ashamed to beg, and too lazy to work, therefore became a soldier, then a warder. This may, at the moment, have been spoken in a jesting way, but it is none the less true. What can be expected in the way of refinement and good morals from a class of men who entered the army or navy, coming, as they did in most cases, from the untaught and mind-debased multitude with which that land of drink and debauchery swarms? It will be seen from the foregoing that very much is expected from them, and in order to fulfill the very hard terms of their contract with the government and keep their places, they are forced to resort to trickery, deception, and perjury, until these, in their attitude toward their employer, the government, become second nature, readily resorting to lies to clear themselves from blame, even in trivial matters, to save themselves from a sixpence fine. There are jealousies among themselves, but when it is a question of deceiving or keeping any neglect of duties or violences against prisoners from the superior authorities, they all unite as one man and affirm or swear to anything they think the position requires. A real pleasure was derived from those prisoners' friends, the rats and mice, which I easily tamed and taught to be my companions. Come on, you are free. Page 480. Not long after my arrival, a prisoner gave me a young rat which became the solace of an otherwise miserable existence. Nothing could he cleaner in its habits or more affectionate in disposition than this pet member of a despised race of rodents. It passed all its leisure time in preening its fur, and after eating always most scrupulously cleaned its hands and face. It was easily taught, and in course of time it could perform many surprising feats. I made a small trapeze, the bar being a slate pencil about 4 inches long, which was wound with yarn and hung from strings of the same, and on this the rat would perform like an acrobat, appearing to enjoy the exercise as much as the performance always delighted me. I made a long cord out of yarn, on which it would climb exactly in the manner in which a sailor shins up a rope, and when the cord was stretched horizontally, it would let its body sway under and travel along the cord, clinging by its hands and feet like a human performer. A rat's natural position when eating a piece of bread is to sit on its haunches, but I had trained this rat to stand upright on its feet, with its head up like a soldier. Placing it in front of me on the bed, I would hand it a piece of bread, which it would hold up to its mouth with its hands while standing erect, keeping one sharp eye on me and the other on its food. The moment it noticed that I was not looking, it would gradually settle down upon its haunches. When my eyes turned on it, it would instantly straighten itself up like a schoolboy caught in some mischief. It always showed great jealousy of my tame mice, and I had to be very careful not to let it get a chance to get at one. On one occasion I was training one of the mice and did not notice that the rat was near. Suddenly, like a flash, it leaped nearly 2 feet, seizing the mouse by the neck precisely as a tiger seizes its prey, although I instantly snatched it away. It was too late. the one fierce bite having severed the jugular. I have mentioned mice, and indeed they were most interesting pets, easily trained and as scrupulously clean and neat as any creature of a higher race could be. I at times had a half-dozen of them, which I had caught in the following simple way. I first stuck a small bit of bread on the inside of my pint tin cup, about halfway down, then turning it bottom up on the floor, I raised one edge just high enough so that a mouse could enter and let the edge of the cup rest on a splinter. It would not be long before one would enter, and as it could not reach the bread otherwise, it stood up, putting its hands against the sides of the cup, thus overbalancing it, causing the cup to drop, and simple Mousie would find itself also a prisoner. Although there was an order that no prisoner should be permitted to have any kind of pets, especially rats and mice, and as the prison swarmed with these, the warders had become tired of being obliged to turn over the cells and prisoners daily in search of these contraband favorites, the loss of which generally provoked the owners to insubordination, in consequence of which there was a tacit understanding that they were not to be interfered with, provided they were kept out of sight when the governor made his rounds. Nothing could overcome the jealousy of my otherwise gentle rat when it saw me petting a mouse, and it would watch for an opportunity to spring upon its diminutive rival and put a speedy end to its career. I had one mouse which to its other accomplishments added the following. It would lie in the palm of my open hand, with its 4 legs up in the air, pretending to be dead. Only the little creature kept its bright eyes wide open, fixed on my face. As soon as I said, "Come to life," it would spring up, rush along my arm, and disappear into my bosom like a flash. 1 Austin, 2 Geo, MacDonald, 3 Officer, 4 Geo, Bidwell, 5 Officer, 6 Noise, 7 Mr. Straight. Q.C. MacDonald speaking to Mr. Straight, Q.C., during the trial. I had a mouse trained the same as the one above described, and was in dread lest a warder should see and destroy it. Therefore, in the hope of getting a guarantee for its safety, one day when the medical officer on his round came to my cell with his retinue, I put my mouse through the dead dog performance. The little fellow lay exposed in my hand with one of its twinkling eyes fixed on me, and the other on these strangers. Such was its confidence in me that it went through the performance perfectly, and when I gave the signal in an instant it was in my, as the poor thing believed, protecting bosom. The doctors laughed, and the retinue of course followed suit. If they had frowned, the latter would have done likewise. The doctors appeared so pleased that I felt certain they would order the warder, as was in their power, to let me keep my harmless pet, the sole companion of my solitude and misery, unmolested. They went outside the cell and lingered. In a moment then the warder came in, and after a struggle got the mouse out of my bosom and put his heel upon it. I am not ashamed to confess that I cried over the loss of this poor little victim of overconfidence in human beings. I once procured a beetle with red stripes across its wing sheaths, and trained it to show some degree of intelligence. This was for months the sole companion of my solitude, but it was at last discovered in my possession and taken away. I made friends with the flies, and found that they displayed no small degree of intelligence. I soon had a dozen tamed, and in the course of my long observations I discovered, among other things, that the males were very tyrannical over the fair sex, and tried to prevent them from getting any of the food. In the summer mornings at daylight, they would gather on the wall next my bed and wait patiently until I placed a little chewed bread on the back of my hand, when instantly there was a rush, and the first one who got possession, if a male, tried to prevent the rest from alighting, and would dart at the nearest, chasing it in zigzags far away. In the meantime another would have attained possession, and it went for the next corner, and for a long time there would be a succession of fierce encounters, until at last all had made good their footing and feasted harmoniously. For as fast as one succeeded in alighting, it was let alone. Sometimes a male would take possession of my forehead, and in case I left him unmolested, he he would keep off intruders on what he evidently considered his domain by darting at them in a ferocious manner. On one occasion, I noticed a fly that had one of its hind legs turned up, apparently out of joint. As it was feeding on my hand, I tried to put my finger on the leg to press it down. During 3 or 4 such attempts, it moved away, after which it appeared to recognize my kind intention and stood perfectly still while I pressed on the leg. It may be unnecessary to add that I failed in performing a successful surgical operation. As the winter approached, the flies began to lose their legs and wings. Those that lost their wings would walk along the wall until they came to the usual waiting spot, and as soon as I put a finger against the wall, the maimed creature would crawl to the usual place on my hand for breakfast. Indeed, the long years of solitude had produced in me such an unutterable longing for the companionship of something which had life that I never destroyed any kind of insect which found its way into my cell. Even when mosquitoes lit on my face, I always let them have their fill undisturbed, and felt well repaid by getting a glimpse of them as they flew and with the music of their buzzing. Chapter 89. In the cell next to mine was a prison genius named Heap, who was one of the most singular characters I ever met. As I shall have occasion to speak of him frequently, I may as well give here a sketch of his life as related to me by himself. He was born in the town of Macclesfield, near Manchester, in 1852, of respectable mechanics, or tradespeople, as they are called in England. His father died when Heap was about 5 years of age, and after a time his mother married a carpenter and joiner of the place. Young Heap was a lively child, up to all sorts of tricks, and does not remember the time since he could walk that he was not in some mischief, and, as he remarked, took to all sorts of deviltry as naturally as a duck to water. As long as his father lived, there was not much check on his mischievous propensities, but his stepfather proved to be a severe and stern judge, and brought him to book for every irregularity, thrashing him most unmercifully for each offense. His mother could not have filled her maternal duty very judiciously, judging from the fact that before he was 12 years old, she set him to follow and watch his stepfather to the house of a woman of whom she was jealous. The boy possessed great natural abilities, and in good hands would have turned out something different than a lifelong prison drudge. He was handsome, genteel in appearance, an apt scholar, though very self-willed and headstrong, and as he grew up his naturally hot temper became uncontrollable. At an early age, he had discovered that by threats of self-injury he could bend his parents to his wishes, but found in his stepfather one who would put up with no nonsense. Even when he cut himself so as to bleed freely, instead of the coveted indulgence, it only procured him an additional thrashing. At 15, he had become ungovernable at home, and his father had him put in the county insane asylum, where he remained a year and a half. While there he caused so much trouble that the attendants were only too glad when he escaped and went to Liverpool. Here he succeeded in getting a situation with a dealer in bric-a-brac, rare books and antiquities. In a short time the proprietor placed so much confidence in his integrity that he gave him the charge of his place during his own absences. And young Heap was not long in taking advantage of his position to rob his employer by taking a book or other article, which he sold to someone of his master's customers. This went on for some time until on one occasion he took the book to a shop kept by a woman to whom he had previously sold several articles and offered it for a sovereign. She examined it and found that it was an ancient, illuminated Greek manuscript, worth 50 times more than the price young Heap asked for it, and suspecting something wrong, she told him to come again for the money the next evening. At the appointed time, he entered the place and was confronted by his master, who contented himself with upbraiding him for his perfidy and discharging him from his service. At this period of his career, he had contracted vicious habits, the most pernicious for him being that of drink, for when sober he was in his right mind, but the moment the drink was in his common sense departed, and he became a raving maniac, ready to fight or perpetrate any other act of folly. Up to this time, he had never been tempted to steal, only in order to supply means for improper indulgences. Not long after being discharged from his situation, he was found by the police acting in so insane a manner under the influence of drink that the magistrate before whom he was taken had him sent to the Raynell Lunatic Asylum. Here, being perfectly reckless, he carried on all sorts of games which made him obnoxious, although making himself very useful in work which he liked, such as gardening, etc. He also took up fancy painting, and soon became a skillful copyist of prints of any description, enlarging or reducing, and painting them in oil or water colors. He also became a good decorator and scene painter, besides devoting time to various studies, including music. At last he found means to effect his escape and lay in hiding until night. Then, as he had on the asylum clothes which would betray him, he went back and got in through the window of the tailor's shop, which was in an isolated building, and exchanged the clothes he had on for a suit belonging to one of the attendants. Thinking himself now safe from recognition, he started off across the country, but had not gone more than 20 miles when, in passing through a small town, a policeman who had just heard of the escape from Raynell arrested him on suspicion. The Raynell authorities sent someone to identify him. He was taken back, tried on the charge of stealing the attendant's suit of clothes, which he still had on, was convicted by the usual intelligent jury, and sentenced to 5 years penal servitude. He finished his term of imprisonment at Chatham, and instead of being set at liberty, was sent under guard back to the asylum. According to English law, if a person confined in a lunatic asylum escapes and keeps away 14 days, he cannot after that be arrested, unless he commits fresh acts of insanity. After several futile attempts, he at last made good his escape and obtained work with a farmer, where he remained safe for 13 days, and was congratulating himself that in less than another day he would be free, when his thoughts were broken off by the appearance of 2 attendants who seized and carried him back to the asylum. The events above narrated had driven him into a state of desperation at what he felt to be gross injustice, and he carried on in such a way that the doctor ordered his head to be shaved and blistered as a punishment, the straitjacket and all other coercive measures having been of no avail. The night watchman had orders to watch him closely, but he kept so sharp an eye on the watchman that he caught him asleep, and creeping to the closet window, which he had previously tampered with, crept out, and after climbing the low wall found himself on a raw November night, with the rain falling in torrents, a stark naked, head shaved and blistered, but once more a free man. In this condition he wandered on throughout the night, and just before daylight he entered a cemetery to find that refuge among the dead of which he thought himself so cruelly deprived by the living. Beneath the entrance to the church there was a passage which led to some family vaults in the basement, and he crept down the passage to seek some shelter for his nude body from the driving rain which had chilled him through. While groping about in the dark, his hand rested on something soft, which to his unbounded delight proved to be an old coat which had probably been left there by the sexton and forgotten. He remained hidden all day and traveled through the fields all night, during which he found a scarecrow, from which he transferred to his own person its old hat and trousers. He said that although so hungry, he never had felt so happy as he did at finding himself once more dressed up. After proceeding a few miles farther, he ventured into a laborer's cottage in quest of food, which was given him, and with it a pair of old boots. As dilapidated, ragged, vagabond-looking, honest people are common in England, no questions were asked, and he proceeded on his way rejoicing in that freedom of which he had been deprived for 10 years or more. Amid all his pranks, he had never been charged with idleness, and now worked at odd jobs about the farms until he had procured a decent suit of clothes, when he applied to a master house painter for work as a journeyman, though he had never done anything of that kind. The master, pleased with his appearance, gave him a trial, but the first job showed such ignorance of the art of house painting that he was forthwith discharged with half a day's wages. However, he had picked up some valuable hints, and being very apt by the time he had been more or less summarily discharged from half a dozen places, he had become a good workman, and henceforth had no trouble about retaining any situation as long as he refrained from beer and restrained his temper. But at the slightest fault-finding on the part of the master, he would fly into a passion and throw up the situation, and this especially if he suspected that anything had leaked out about his imprisonment. While at work with a companion at painting the interior of a gentleman's residence near Bradford, a word or two was dropped which made him believe his fellow workmen had become aware of his being an ex-convict. Quitting work, he went to a public house, passing the rest of the day in carousing. About midnight, while on his way to his boarding house, it occurred to him that he had noticed a good many valuable things about the gentleman's house which he could obtain. No sooner thought than done. The entrance was in a moment gained. He had just consciousness enough left to gather a few things, then lie down by the side of them and fell into a drunkard sleep, in which the servants found him when they came down in the morning. A constable was sent for. He was given in charge, tried, convicted of the crime of burglary, and sentenced to 7 years penal servitude. His former term of 5 years had made him proficient in all the dodges of prison life, and he felt justified in his own mind in using all his craft in order to put in his 7 years as easily as possible. As he had been in Raynell Asylum, he knew that by putting on the balmy, so as to be sent to the lunatic department, he would not be subjected to the prison rules, and be as well off as he had been in the free asylum. Persistent attempts at suicide by cutting himself in the arms and legs with a piece of glass so as to bleed freely accomplished his purpose. Being placed with the other convict lunatics, he made himself useful, but on account of his bad temper and overbearing, quarrelsome disposition, obnoxious to his fellow prisoners. Eventually, he was discharged with an 18-months ticket of leave and $2.50 as capital for a new departure. He went to Liverpool, procured a passage on board a freight steamer to America, which he paid for by working at painting. Landing at New York, he made his way to Norfolk, where he procured work as a painter. Owing to his infirmity of temper, he did not keep his place long, and after knocking about for a few months, he took a freak to return to England, the last place of all for any man who has once been a prisoner. By Austin Byron Bidwell, after imprisonment. From photo, by Stuart Hartford. Once more in his native land, he procured work without difficulty at house painting, but as usual remained in one place but a very short time. His earnings, like those of a great majority of the working class in England, were squandered in the public house. Soon after the events just recorded, Heap concluded to visit his old home in Macclesfield. He accordingly threw up his situation, and arrived at the railway station an hour before the train was due. In order to while away the time, he entered a public house and drank several glasses of ale. The compartment which he entered happened to be empty, and as usual whenever he indulged his appetite for anything containing alcohol, he was soon quite out of his mind and fancied that someone on the train was coming to murder him, and leaped headlong from the train, which was going at the rate of 40 miles an hour. This came to a standstill. He was taken on board again, not seriously injured, and left at Wrexham in Denbighshire, from which he was sent to the Denbigh Insane Asylum. This being a Welsh institution, did not, according to Heap, possess those facilities for enjoying life which were so liberally supplied to the inmates of the Raynell Asylum near Liverpool. Accordingly, he behaved himself with so much propriety that the doctor discharged him as cured. Not long after his return, he got work near Manchester at painting in a block of new houses where the plumbers were at work putting in the gas and water pipes. On a Saturday, when he left work at noon, he met a young plumber who was out of a job. This man said he knew where he could earn a sovereign if he had tools to do a job in a butcher's shop, and told Heap that if he would go to the houses where he had been painting and borrow a few plumber's tools and assist him, he would divide the amount. Heap went back, but finding that the master plumber and all his men had gone, Saturday afternoon in England being a half-holiday for laborers, he took the few tools required, went and finished the job by 7 p.m. Then instead of taking the tools back, they went into a public house where they caroused till midnight. When they separated, Heap taking the tools to his boarding house. On Monday he started early, so as to get the tools back before the other workmen arrived. On nearing the houses he passed a policeman who walked a little lame. He turned his head to look back, and the policeman happened to do the same thing, and seeing Heap looking at him his suspicions were aroused. Turning back, he came up and asked him what he had in the two bosses' tool baskets. Heap informed him, and on further questioning showed him the key to the house from which he had taken the tools, and asked him to accompany him there, which he did. They entered, Heap putting back the tools, and showed the policeman where he had been painting and wished him to stay until the master came in half an hour. This the policeman declined to do, and took the tools and told Heap to come to the police station. Heap lost his temper and began cursing him. The policeman went to the door, and seeing another just passing beckoned him in, and the two marched him to the station. The plumber was sent for, and was induced to make a charge against Heap, and value the stolen goods at 10 shillings. Seeing that the police were bound to make a case against him, he seized the plumber's knife and cut his throat, severing the windpipe. The doctor was sent for. He was transferred to the jail hospital, and in the course of 2 or 3 weeks was well enough to appear before the magistrate, though he could not speak, and was bound over for trial. In the meantime, the police had discovered that he had served 2 penal terms, on the strength of which, when convicted, the magistrate sentenced him to 10 years penal servitude. At the trial he had not yet recovered the use of his voice, nor did he have anyone to defend him, for at that time, unlike the present, the Crown did not furnish a lawyer for the defense of those who were unable to employ one at their own expense. When the magistrate was about to pronounce the sentence, he said that as the prisoner had escaped from ordinary asylums, he should send him to a place from which he could not escape, meaning a prison. Bank of England scene. Visitor holding £1 million, $5 million, Bank of England notes. Chapter 90. Once convicted of a crime in England, it is impossible, unless a man has money or friends, for him to obtain an honest livelihood unless he is the happy possessor of a trade. All the great corporations demand references that will cover a series of years of the applicant's life, and above all, strict inquiry is made as to his last employer. This cuts the ground out from under the feet of the unfortunate, and feeling that England can no longer be a home to him, he turns his eyes as a matter of course to America. A fair percentage of the prisoners are men who, perhaps under great temptation, or while under the influence of drink, have broken the laws, but yet are honorably minded and resolved in future to lead an honest life. Such are not undesirable citizens, but there is another class, that of the professional criminal. With these the prisons swarm, and worse yet, the slums and saloons of the great cities are breeding thousands more that will take the places of those now on the stage. The conditions of society in England are such that the procession of criminals is an unending one. The society that creates the criminal also has established a system of police repression that makes the life history of society's victim one of misery, until such time when the criminal, growing wise by experience, shakes the dust of English soil off from his feet and transfers himself, a moral ruin to our country, here to become a curse and a burden. This flow of moral sewage to our shores is constant and unceasing. Our government has frequently protested against it, but with no success, for the officials in England indignantly deny that the state either encourages or assists the exodus of her criminal classes. But from my personal knowledge, I know this to be false. The officials over there have found out an effectual way to rid themselves of their discharged prisoners as fast as their sentences expire, and cast them on our shores. And this is so ingenious a way that the wrong can never be brought home to them. During my 20 years' residence in Chatham, I suppose nearly half as many thousands asked me for information about America, and at least 95% assured me that when released they would join the society and depart at once for that happy hunting ground, that promised land which charms the imagination no less of the criminal than of the honest poor of the old world. In every English prison the walls are decorated with placards, gorgeous in hue, of rival firms appealing to the readers for patronage. Join us, they all say, and every prisoner knows the appeal "join us" means if you do we will ferry you over the Jordan that rolls between this desert land and the plains flowing with milk and honey on the other side. The firms I mention are those arch humbugs, the Prisoners' Aid Societies of England. Elizabeth Fry, who made aid to prisoners fashionable and a society fad in England, has much to answer for. Prisoners' aid societies have sprung up in every quarter of England, and having a rich soil, and under the fostering care of the government, have flourished with a rank and luxuriant growth. These societies draw their nourishment from English soil, but unhappily for us, their tall branches hang over our wall, and their ripened fruit falls on our ground. From the time a prisoner becomes accustomed to his surroundings, until the hour of his release, the one thing ever uppermost in his thoughts, the one distracting subject and cause of anxious solicitude, is the question, which society shall I join? It is a tolerably safe venture to predict that he will join the Royal Prisoners' Aid Society of London, which society is happy in having Her Gracious Majesty and a long list of illustrious lords and ladies for governors. What that may mean no one knows. Certainly no benefit from these people ever accrues to the discharged prisoners, but who can describe the glory that falls on the 4 or 5 reverend gentlemen, sons, nephews, or brothers of deans or bishops, high-salaried secretaries of this particular society, who pose at the annual meeting in Exeter Hall before a brilliant audience, and after have the felicity of seeing their report in the church and society journals, and their names connected with such exalted people. The way the government over there accomplishes its purpose of getting rid of its criminal population at our expense, and at the same time is able to answer the charges of our government with disavowal, is this. The Home Secretary alone possesses the pardoning power for the United Kingdom, and directly controls every prison, his fiat being law in all things to every official as well as to every inmate. He has officially recognized and registered at the Home Office every Prisoners' Aid Society in England, Scotland, and Wales, and in order to boom them, he gives to every discharged prisoner an extra gratuity of £3 provided he joins a Prisoners' Aid Society on his discharge, the result being that all do so. England is a small and compact country, and the police have practically one head, and that head is the Home Secretary. Under the circumstances, the system of police espionage is so perfect that whenever a discharged prisoner is reconvicted for another crime, he cannot escape recognition. And in all such cases, the Home Secretary notifies the particular aid society who received the prisoner on his discharge of the fact, very much to the vexation of the officials of the society, who are all anxious for a good record in reforming men that come officially under their auspices. They publish that all who are never reported as reconvicted are reformed, and all love to make a big showing for the money subscribed at the all-important annual meeting, the result being that all the men hustled out of the country by the society count as reformed men. These societies are supported by subscriptions, which all go in salaries and office rents. The assistance given to the discharged prisoner is limited to the £3 extra gratuity given the society by the government on the prisoner's behalf. The London societies have an agreement with the Netherlands Line and the Wilson Line of steamers to take to sea for £2.10, all working men they send to them. I have talked to thousands of men who joined the society, most of whom intended to go to America, and I have talked to scores who had joined, but who, unluckily for themselves, not leaving England, were reconvicted and sent back to Chatham. Throughout 20 years, I conversed with several thousand men who joined the society avowing they were going to America and were never heard of again in England, and have also known some scores of men who passed through the hands of the society agents, yet were afterward reconvicted. Therefore, I am in a position to speak with authority on the important question of England dumping her criminal population on our shores. Chapter 91. Well, my man, what do you intend to do? I want to go to America, sir. Tut, tut, you mean you want to go to sea? Yes, sir, I want to go to sea. The Royal Society and the Christian Aid Societies, presided over by a Rev. Mr. Whiteley, enjoy a bad preeminence in this respect. The year before my release, the latter stated at the annual meeting that 6,000 discharged prisoners had passed through his society, and I venture to assert that 5,000 of these found their way to this country through the assistance of this society. These two societies have been boomed to an incredible extent, and it would be a curious study if any report could be had as to how the large subscriptions were actually expended. For the sake of making my narrative clear, I will here only speak of the first-named society, leaving Liverpool. George Bidwell's farewell to John Bull. 2 months before release, the prisoner must inform the warder that he intends to join the Royal Society. He notifies the Home Office, which in turn notifies the Society and forwards a warrant for £3. The prisoner upon discharge takes a certain train for London and is met upon his arrival at the station by an agent of the Society. This agent ranks as a servant, is usually an ex-prisoner, and is always paid 21 shillings a week. He pilots his man at a certain hour before the Reverend Secretary, and here follows a verbatim report of the dialogue between the great man and the poor, timid and dreadfully embarrassed ex-prisoner. Great man, well, my man, what do you intend to do? Ex-prisoner, I want to go to America. Great man, tut, tut, my man, you mean you want to go to sea? Ex-prisoner, taking the hint. Yes, sir, I want to go to sea. Great man, very well, my man. Go with this agent, who will fix it with the ship captain so you can go to sea. If a steamer of either line named is about to sail, he is taken on board, at once goes to the steerage, and just before sailing the agent hands him a ticket, and the criminal is safely off for America. England is rid of a bad subject, and the Royal Society has one more reformed man to put in its report. In addition to the £3 gratuity, the ex-prisoner has been paid £1, £2 or £3 in addition, provided his sentence had been at least 5 years. The society is not a cent out of pocket over him, and forlorn and friendless he lands here with from $2 to $15 in his pocket. He has got the cheap suit of clothes he wears, 1 handkerchief and 1 pair of stockings extra. It is almost certain he will speedily drift into crime, spending the remainder of his life in prison, and finally dying there or in the poorhouse. There is just one way this evil can be stopped, I might say 2 ways. The first, and a method that would be effectual in stopping the influx of criminals from all countries, is to let Congress put a tax of $30 or $50 on the steamship companies for every passenger not an American citizen whom they bring to America. Not one discharged criminal in 1,000 could meet the tax in addition to the fare. The only other way possible would be for our government to request the English government to furnish them with photographs, marks and measurements of all discharged criminals, then have them copied and sent to the immigration commissioners of our parts. But that would involve a radical change in these boards and their methods. Efficiency there under our corrupt system is, I fear, hopeless. I visited Ellis Island a few days ago and saw how they passed a shipload of immigrants in a few minutes. And as I looked, I felt it was hopeless to expect any efficient measures to throw back the foul tide that is polluting our shores. Seldom as men of the criminal class once safe in America ever return to England, yet they do now and then return. In the 2 or 3 cases that came under my observation, it was very much to their loss and grief, for they only came back to undergo another term. One day in 1890, a man working in my party slipped a note into my hand that had been given him for me in chapel that morning. As in similar cases, I secreted the note, and when safe in my little room I read it. The writer said he had lately come down from London, and was most anxious to get into my party in order to have a chance to talk with me. He said he had been living in Chicago and could give me all the news. He ended the note by stating he was being murdered by hard work and implored me to try and get him into my party, where it was not so hard. This I was most anxious to do, as in my party you could talk almost with impunity. To have a man near me fresh and only a year before in Chicago would be like a letter from home and also a newspaper. Therefore, I determined to get Foster in my party if possible. At this time, I had been 17 years a resident, and was, in fact, the oldest inhabitant, and had some little influence in a quiet way. About 11 years before I had been put in the party, and had a chance to learn bricklaying, and having become an expert in the art was given charge of the bricklaying. I was on the best of terms with our officer, so when, a day or 2 later, one of our men was so fortunate in the Chatham view of it as to meet with an accident and be admitted to that heaven the infirmary, I told my officer to ask for Foster to replace him. He did so, and he, very much to his gratification, found himself by my side, with a trowel instead of a shovel in his hand. We worked side by side, winter and summer, storm and shine, for 2 years, and in spite of myself I began soon to like the man. His chief and only virtues were truthfulness and fair-mindedness toward his friends, rare and incongruous virtues for a professional burglar. Nevertheless, he possessed them in a marked degree. This is a statement to make a cynic smile, and is one of those cases where the result is justifiable. Yet, however the cynic may smile, there is plenty of all-around good faith in the world, and there is no nation, race, or color, no clique, religion, nor social strata that has a monopoly of the article. Good faith and truth grow in unlikely places, as I have found in my career, for I have looked on life from both sides, and to look on it from the seamy side is instructive, indeed, for then the mask is off and the true character is revealed. I have been away down in the depths, and for years have toiled cheek by jowl through sunshine and storm, in blinding snows and pelting rain, with my brother men under conditions too brutal and demoralizing to be understood if described. Conditions where the very worst side of human character would naturally be thought to come to the front, and I came out of the fierce struggle in that pit of death with conclusions as to the human animal that are decidedly favorable. And I am inclined to the view that man was born almost an angel, and that, in spite of the fearful temptations of the world into which he has been thrust, much of the angelic pottery abides. Chapter 92. Foster's experience during his 4 years' residence in Chicago was decidedly novel, and it had evidently brightened his wits, that is, increased his cunning without adding to his honesty. And as I think it will interest my reader to get a view of life from the actor's own standpoint, I will relate one of the many stories he told me during the years we worked together. Upon Foster's release from his first term of imprisonment, he joined the Christian Aid Society of London, and Mr. Whiteley, the secretary, promptly sent him to sea, as he has thousands of others. In due time he arrived in New York, but as he had heard much of Chicago, he determined to go there. He arrived penniless, but within an hour ran against an old friend in the person of a former partner in the art of burglary, who had been a fellow prisoner with him in London. This man's name was Turtle, and Mr. Whiteley had only sent him to sea 2 brief years before. It was plain from his magnificent diamond ring, pin and big bankroll freely displayed, that the seafaring life of the former protégé of the London Prison Aid Society was a profitable occupation. He was delighted to meet Foster, and took him to a tailor's at once and fitted him out liberally, at the same time handing him $250 just for pocket money. When, on the next day, Foster stated to his friend that he was ready to undertake a burglary, Turtle was displeased and said, "No, we are on the honest game which pays better." What that was will appear. Turtle had a large private inquiry office, with 2 of the city detectives for side partners, who turned over to him all business in which there was a prospect of mutual profit. All imaginable schemes of villainy were concocted and executed there, and with perfect impunity too. For Turtle had the ear of all the magistrates, and was in with all the gangs that made the City Hall of Chicago the worst and vilest den of robbers that encumbers this earth. What cause the pessimist has for his boding views when in cities like New York, Quaker Philadelphia, Chicago, and San Francisco, the city halls, those centers of municipal life, hold and are ruled by the worst and most dangerous gangs of criminals sheltered by any roof in any city. Alas, that the center, which should be the purest stream within the city, should be a foul cesspool, sending out poisonous vapors to pollute the life of the citizens. Universal suffrage in our great centers is a corrupt tree, and its fruits must needs be poisonous. Turtle gave his friend Foster a welcome at his office, and at once enrolled him on his staff, but virtually made him a member of the firm. So, between the 2 police headquarters thieves and the 2 English ones, they had a combination indeed. Many stories Foster told me during the years of our intercourse that were novel and strange, and gave me a view of the social world seldom seen. Here is a specimen. One day a countryman appeared at police headquarters in Chicago and announced that he had been robbed of $20,000, and showed how his coat pocket had been cut open and the money taken. This, he explained, had been done in a crowd. It was a strange place for a man to carry so large a sum, and still stranger, the pocket was cut on the inside. Of course, a pickpocket, in the rare event of cutting the pocket of an intended victim, must of necessity cut the pocket from the outside. The countryman had fallen at headquarters to the tender mercies of the 2 partners of Turtle. One glance at the pocket showed them there was a colored gentleman in the woodpile, and as there was $20,000 in the deal somewhere, they determined to have some share of it. They of course pretended to believe the story of the countryman, but for fear some of the other headquarters men might hear and want a share, they hurried him away from the office over to the Sherman House. Then one went to Turtle's office and posted him on the situation. The countryman was anxious to leave town, but on various pretenses they held him for 2 days, but as he stoutly affirmed that the lost money was his own, they were puzzled to solve the mystery. But their knowledge of human nature was such that they felt certain that if they could only arrive at the bottom, the old gentleman would not be quite as white as he pretended to be. He came from an obscure mountain town in East Tennessee, and while they fancied a trip there might solve matters, they feared to lose their victim. For victim, these human tigers determined the countryman should be. The second day they resolved on decisive measures to get at the truth, and at the same time secure some plunder, provided the Tennessean had any cash. So far, Turtle and Foster had not been seen by the victim. The detectives asked the countryman to remain one more night to see if they could not catch the men who had robbed him. That afternoon, one of Turtle's staff secured a room at the same hotel and, seizing an opportunity, slipped into the countryman's chamber and concealed some burglar tools under the mattress of his bed and in his carpet bag. This once done, they marched the guy along Clark Street, and as arranged, Turtle and one of his staff met them, and shaking hands with the two detectives asked if they were arresting their companion for a job. Upon their saying he was a wealthy gentleman from the South, Turtle burst out laughing and said he knew him for an old-time burglar, and if they would search his house they would find stolen goods, and ended by saying, "Bring him down to my office and I will show you his picture." The detectives now changed their tones and threatened to arrest him. He, having, as the sequel will show, a bad conscience, became frightened. Then they arrested him and announced that they were going to search his room at the hotel. This they did, taking him along. Of course, they found what they had previously hidden, very much to the terror of the countryman, who, lashed by a bad conscience, began to think he was in a fix. The friends of the hour before now became threatening bullies, promising to get him 10 years for the possession of burglar tools. They took him to Turtle's office, and there stripping him they found to their disappointment that he had no money, but found carefully folded up in an inner pocket a post office receipt for a registered letter sent from Nashville to St. Paul. They kept him a prisoner that night, while Turtle left by the first train for St. Paul with the receipt in his pocket. The next morning found him in St. Paul, and a few minutes later he walked out of the office with the registered letter, which proved to be a bulky one. Tearing it open, he found it full of United States bonds and greenbacks, amounting in all to $20,000. The next day, all save $1,000, reserved for the victim, was divided among the 4 birds of prey. That day the victim was taken before a friendly magistrate and fully committed to await in jail the action of the grand jury. 24 hours later a tool called on him at the jail and gave him the option of taking $1,000 and getting out of town by the first train or getting 10 years for the possession of burglar tools. The poor fool, with trembling eagerness, accepted the first part of the ultimatum, and within an hour a bail bond was filled up, and darkness found the baffled old man speeding westward, never again to look on his own people. But how was he a baffled old man? He had embarked in a scheme of villainy, but had been beaten at his own game by sharper rascals. From whom did he steal the money? Raid. In a small Tennessee town there lived a widow whose husband had been killed in the Confederate Army and who found herself, like so many more Southern ladies at the close of the war, impoverished and with a family of children to be provided with bread. But it seems she was a brave body and with a head for business. She opened a small hotel in Nashville, and by reason of her history, no less than her excellent hostelry, she thrived apace and, investing all her savings in newly started industrial enterprises in Nashville, her small investments brought in large returns, which were reinvested, until at 40, finding herself mistress of a competency, she quit business and went to spend the remainder of her days where she was born. The hero of the adventure in Chicago was not only her neighbor, but had been the comrade of her husband through the deadly fights of the war. She naturally turned to him as a friend for advice. He first asked her to be his wife, and upon her refusal he began to urge her to dispose of all her interests in Nashville and reinvest her money in the nearby city of Knoxville. At last she consented and sent him to Nashville with authority to act as her agent. He disposed of her property, except the old hotel. He was paid $20,000 on her account, and once with the money in his possession he determined to keep it. It was a cowardly deed, and dearly did he pay for it. He wrote her he was going to Chicago and would take the money with him, as he would only remain for a day. To Chicago he came and, as related, robbed himself, sending off the money in a registered letter to himself. Then he appeared at police headquarters with his cut pocket and clumsy story, which appeared in the next morning's paper. He sent a marked copy of the paper to the lady, and at the same time wrote a hypocritical letter stating that he was so heartbroken over losing her money that he did not have the courage to look her in the face, and never should until such time as he could repay the money. He said he was going to California to work, and when he had enough she would see him again, but not before. I resolved to leave a message of hope and high resolve. How easy it is for man to become an unspeakable villain, and how nicely this one was hoisted with his own petard. Eventually, this catastrophe proved a blessing to the widow. It drove her back to her hotel again, and soon after she became the wife of one of the bravest and best men Tennessee ever produced. I was so interested in the fate of this lady that when in Nashville in 1893, I tried to hunt her up. I found several who knew the whole story, and from them I heard her after history and a full confirmation of Foster's narrative. Foster remained 4 years in Chicago and flourished. He and Turtle became very influential in politics and partners in a combine of rascally aldermen and police magistrates that robbed the city and the citizens with impunity. But unluckily for him, he one day took it into his head to pay a visit to his old haunts in England, there to display his diamonds and bankroll to such of his former cronies as happened to be at liberty. On arriving in London, he began to play the role of a rich American, but was recognized by the police, an old charge raked up against him. Arrested, promptly placed on trial, found guilty and sentenced to 10 years imprisonment. Although the possessor of considerable property, he is today toiling at Chatham like a slave, and probably if he lives he will come out a broken man. It is a certainty that the very day he is liberated he will go to sea, being sent by a Prisoners' Aid Society, and a few days later become an ornament to that good city of Chicago. Once there, his ambition will not be satisfied until he takes his seat as alderman, becoming one of the city fathers. Many more immoral and dangerous than he write aldermen after their names in that windy city. Bidwell picking oakum. Chapter 93. I am glad to say that during the almost lifetime I passed at Chatham, there were only a scant half-dozen Americans who came down to keep me company. One, Stoneman by name, interested me. He was a man of great nerve and quick apprehension, and very truthful, therefore I found his stories of his adventures most interesting, besides the fact that his history was another proof of the truth that wrongdoing never pays. Stoneman was of good parentage, and had entered the army in 1861, making a good record up to and including the Battle of Gettysburg. There, owing to a quarrel with his captain, he deserted and became a bounty jumper, making a large amount of money. But when the war ended, finding his occupation gone, he entered upon a life of crime, starting out first as a very successful express robber. The last robbery he engaged in that line was on the New Haven Road near Norwalk. His share amounted to some thousands, but he was literally bowled out, and by a singular circumstance. One of his confederates by the name of Riley had been arrested and was confined at Norwalk. He engaged as counsel for his chum a well-known criminal lawyer of New York by the name of Stewart, and arranged with him to go up to Norwalk to see Riley the following day. Although Stoneman had plenty of money, he told Stewart he had none, but Riley had. Then he gave Riley's wife $2,500 and told her to be present at the interview between the lawyer and her husband. At the interview, Riley told him he would give him $2,500 if he cleared him, or $1,000 if he got him off with a sentence of 2 years or less. Stewart was hungry as a shark to finger the money, and writing out a receipt for the full amount, inserted the conditions agreed upon. Putting the money in his pocket, he started back to New York with Mrs. Riley. Stoneman was on the train waiting for them, and as soon as they started, he joined them. It happened the train was crowded, and they had to stand. It seems some pickpocket saw Stewart pull out the money and determined to get it from him. On the arrival of the train in New York, he succeeded in doing so. Stoneman had hurried out of the station and, of course, knew nothing of the loss. So soon as Stewart discovered his loss, he blamed him for it, and being in a fury, he flew to police headquarters, secured the services of a friendly detective, and going to the hotel that he knew Stoneman frequented, had him arrested on a charge of robbing him. The end of it all was that Stewart and the detectives got all his money, and then, knowing him to be a daring man, one that would neither forget nor fear to avenge his wrong, to get him out of the way, they betrayed him to the Connecticut police as one of the express robbers. He was sent to Norwalk to stand his trial, was convicted and sentenced to 5 years, and sent to Wethersfield. Being a good mechanic, he was put in the blacksmith shop, and there, with an eye to the future, he did what is frequently done by professional gentlemen in our prisons, made a complete and most finely tempered set of burglar tools. They were too bulky to be smuggled out by friendly warders, so he secreted them in the shop where he worked and ruled. Many of the prisoners in Wethersfield are expert workmen, and from the machine shops there a high class of work is turned out. Among other workshops, there is one for the manufacture of silver-plated ware. Stoneman had made chums with one of the prisoners who held a confidential position in the silverware manufactory. As Stoneman's sentence was the first to expire, he gave him points, and it was plotted between them that the prison itself should be burglarized by Stoneman on a certain night after his release. The confidential man was to leave the way clear to the safe, where the silver bars used in the business were stored. He in due time was liberated, with the customary injunctions from the warden and officers not to come back any more. He did come back, but in a way entirely unanticipated by them. He, of course, knew the whole routine of the place, the stations of the guards, and that the wall after 8 p.m. was left entirely unguarded. The second night after his liberation found him beneath the wall with no other implements than a light ladder of the right height. In a minute he was on top, had pulled his ladder up and lowered it inside. Once inside, every inch of the place was familiar to him, and he had a clear field. The shops, although inside of the boundary walls, were quite separate from the main building, where the men closely guarded were confined. He entered the familiar room where he so long had worked, and easily placed his hands on his, to him, precious kit of tools, and carried his jimmies, wedges, sledges, bits, braces, drills, etc., to the wall, and then landed them safe outside. Then he returned and entered the room where the plunder he sought lay. Thanks to his friend, the way was easy, and his art was not required to secure it. There were 600 ounces in silver bars, a pretty good load in avoirdupois, but he only made one journey of it, mounted the wall, and speedily was over. Stoneman was a long-headed fellow. He had taken, without the owner's leave, one of the many boats on the banks of the nearby river. He carried his plunder and tools down to the boat and pulled across the river 2 miles down to where quite a stream empties into the Connecticut. He pulled some distance up it, then putting everything into bags he sank them in the creek. Then drifting back into the Connecticut River again, he threw his ladder over and turned the boat adrift. At 7 o'clock the next morning he was in New York. In due time, in the idiom of the professionals, he raised his plant, and the burglar's kit manufactured in the Connecticut State Prison did what Stoneman considered yeoman's service. With all his art and cunning, justice would not be cajoled by him, but weighed him in her balance to a good purpose too. His success in his particular line was great, but he paid dearly for it all. Many times he escaped detection, but not always. Not to escape, but to be brought to the bar, means a fearful gap in the life of a criminal. He was, as I say, famous in certain circles for his success in his lawless cause. Yet in the 20 years between 1865 and 1886, he passed 16 years in captivity. In that year he went to England with a confederate, and a few hours later in London they snatched a parcel of money from a bank messenger in Lombard Street. Both were caught in the act and sentenced at the Old Bailey to 20 years each. Today Stoneman is toiling under brutal taskmasters, and it is all but certain he will perish at his task, friendless, alone, unpitied. Better so even, for should he ever be freed, it will not be until the 20th century is well on its way to the have-beens of time, then only to find himself a battered hulk stranded on a shore from which the tide has ebbed forever. Chapter 94. I had, of course, for many years heard much of the Fenian prisoners in the English prisons, particularly Sergeant McCarty and William O'Brien. Soon after my arrival at Chatham, I was placed in the same party with them. We were all three strongly drawn together, but were shy of being the first to speak. Of course, it was strictly against the rules to talk, but as a matter of fact, the prisoners find many opportunities for talking, particularly if they do their work. The officers are reported and fined if their men fall behind in their task. So if a man is any way backward in working, the officer keeps his weather eye open and reports him for any infraction of the rules. One day, soon after they were put in my party, I gave O'Brien a hand in fixing his run. We spoke a few words. The ice was broken. We soon became fast friends, and our friendship remained unbroken until their happy release some years after. They were fine, manly fellows, and I in time came to have a warm affection for them. McCarty had for nearly 20 years been a sergeant in the English army. He had come out of the Indian Mutiny with a splendid record and had been recommended for a commission. But while wearing the British uniform, his heart was warm for Ireland and her cause, so when, in 1867, his battery being then stationed in Dublin, he was informed many devoted adherents to the Fenian cause had determined to try and seize Dublin, with a view of starting a wide revolt against English domination, perilous as it was. He cast his lot in with them, and speedily found sufficient adherents in his own field battery to seize it and bring it into action against the English. The plan miscarried. Sergeant McCarty, along with many others, was arrested and tried for treason. As a matter of course, was speedily convicted, and sentenced to be hanged, drawn, and quartered. This sentence was commuted to penal servitude for life. O'Brien was an enthusiastic youngster of 17, and an ardent patriot. He had enlisted in a regiment then stationed in Ireland for no other reason than to familiarize himself in military affairs, also to win over recruits to the Fenian cause, and when the revolt began to be in a position to seize arms. The result of it all, so far as my two friends were concerned, they found themselves by my side in the great Chatham ship basin loading trucks with mud and clay, and that upon a diet of black bread and potatoes. The cars or trucks held 4 tons, there were 3 men to a truck, and the task was 19 trucks a day, and between the urging of officers, frightened themselves for fear the task might not be done, and the mud and starvation, it was despairing work. The punishments were not only severe, but were dealt out with a liberal hand. The men, as a rule, were willing to work, but between weakness, brought on by perpetual hunger, and the misery of the incessant bullying of the officers, some few suicided every year, but many more did worse to themselves. That is, the poor fellows, seeing nothing but misery before them, would, when the trucks were being shifted on the rail, deliberately thrust an arm or leg under the wheels and have it taken off. No less than 22 did this in 1874. Of course, the object was to get out of the mud. When once a man's leg or arm was off, he would no longer be able to handle a shovel, and would necessarily be placed in an inside or cripple's party and set to work picking oakum or breaking stones, with the result that, being free from severe toil and sheltered from the storms, they would not be so hungry. Then again they could more easily escape being reported, and that meant much. Condemned to be hanged. Weighing office, Bank of England. There was never anything but black bread for breakfast and supper, save only 1 pint of gruel with the bread for breakfast. For dinner every day we got a pound of boiled potatoes and 5 ounces of black bread, 3 days a week, 5 ounces of meat. That is, 15 ounces a week for a man toiling hard in the keen sea air. We were always on the verge of starvation. Our sufferings were terrible. In our hunger, there was no vile refuse we would not devour greedily if opportunity occurred. O'Brien was a slight, delicate fellow, quite unfitted for the hardships and toil he was subjected to, but he was a high-spirited, brave youngster, and his spirit carried him through, while many a man better fitted physically to endure the toil gave in and died, or became utterly broken down, and would be sent away to an invalid station, a physical wreck. McCarty and I used to do extra work so as to shield O'Brien, and so long as our trucks were filled on time, the officer made no complaint. The prisoners were certainly very good to each other, and usually did all in their power to help and cheer up the weaker men. In 1877, my 2 friends were liberated. I was glad to see them go, but I missed them sadly. But McCarty had suffered too much. He only survived his liberation a few days, dying in Dublin to the grief of all Ireland. O'Brien started a tobacco store in Dublin, where he still is. I knew all of the dynamiters, Curtin, Daly, Dr. Gallagher, Egan, etc. However misguided, yet they meant to serve their country, and dearly have they paid for their zeal. I pitied poor Gallagher. The strain on his spirit was too great. He soon broke down, and his dejected, forlorn looks, his stooping shoulders and listless walk made me and all think his days were numbered. But he had immense vitality and still lived when I was liberated. But he was truly a pitiable object, and if he is ever to live to breathe the air a free man, then his friends must secure a speedy release, for he is slowly sinking into his grave. Retrospections. Chapter 95. I have related how, the Sunday after my sentence, in my despair I took the little Bible off the shelf. The other books I had at Chatham besides the Bible were a dictionary and the life of the prophet Jeremiah. Once, soon after my arrival in Chatham, I took the Jeremiah down from the shelf, but speedily put it back and made a vow never to take it down again, and I never did. It remained in view on the little shelf for 19 years. While I sat there watching it rot away, the dictionary is a good book, but grows tiresome at times. As for the Bible, there is no discount on that. For 14 years, I was a careful student of its sacred pages. Every Sunday of that 14 years, from 12 o'clock until 2, I used to walk the stone floor of my cell preaching a sermon with no audience but my dictionary and the life of the prophet Jeremiah. I at first began my Bible studies and my sermons as a means to occupy my thoughts and keep my mind bright. It saved my life and reason. I need hardly say that I became tolerably familiar with the book, and I had the great advantage of studying the Bible without a commentary. I thought in my enthusiasm I should never tire of the Bible, but after 10 or 12 years I began to grow weary of it and grew very hungry for other mental food. I wanted a Shakespeare, for with him to keep me company, I could no longer be in the desolation of solitude. At last, I determined to get my friends to try for me. I had learned the Bible almost by heart. The smallest incidents in the life of the prophet Jeremiah were much more familiar to me than the history of the Civil War, and Anathoth took on proportions which made it as real as New York and far more important. The desperate efforts I had made to keep myself from falling into the condition of so many I had seen drooping to idiocy and death were, I felt, successful. And any occupation which kept alive the intellect could not but be beneficial. I was hungry, starving for mental food. Never had books appeared so attractive. Never was kingdom so cheerfully offered for a horse as I would have offered mine for an octavo. My friends had written for me to the government, but with no success. At last they had interested the American minister in London, who promised to write to the Home Secretary for me, but a year had slipped by and I had heard nothing. Jeremiah continued with me, and it seemed he was to remain with me to the end, but a change was coming. Can I ever forget the day it happened? can I ever cease to remember the delight, the incredulity, the astonishment of that happy day. I had come in at night hungry, cold, wet, and miserable. I made my way a little depressed to my cell. As I was about to step across the threshold, I saw a book lying on my little wooden bed. Amazed and astonished, I hesitated to enter. Small as such a circumstance appears, the very sight of the book brought on a weakness. I feared to pick it up. A horrible dread seized me that it might be a new Bible, and I was unwilling to risk another disappointment. The footprint on the sand was not more suggestive nor more awe-inspiring to Robinson Crusoe than the appearance of that book was to me. In mood as lonely, in plight as desperate as his, there lay before me a sight as unlooked for, and, as it seemed, as full of meaning as the footprint was to Robinson. At last I pulled myself together, determined to end the suspense and know what was before me. I picked up the book, and who can understand the delight, the joy, the rapture even with which I read on the title page, the works of William Shakespeare. In an instant I became a new man. If ever one human being felt gratitude to another, I felt it at that moment for the American minister. To him I owed it that henceforth a new light was to stream through the fluted glass of my window, that henceforth a new world was opened up for me to live in, and the world seemed lighter to me. Many a month and year afterward my cell was filled, and my heart cheered by the multitude of friends the divine William provided for me. About the time I received my Shakespeare, another piece of happy fortune befell me. A smallpox scare was existing outside, and all hands in the prison were ordered to be vaccinated. When the doctor came around a few days afterward to examine the effects of the operation, he found my arm so swollen that he directed me to be taken to the hospital. For 25 days, I had full opportunity to learn what the girl in Dickens' Little Dorrit meant when she called the hospital an evenly place. It was the first time I had ever been admitted, and the change from the horrible mud hole to the rest and comfort of a cell in the hospital was indeed almost evenly. With nothing to do but to read my Shakespeare, the cravings of hunger for the first time since my imprisonment satisfied, I was tempted to believe, I did partly believe, that the world had few positions pleasanter than mine. Godliness with contentment is undoubtedly great gain. Contentment alone without the godliness is no poor thing, and was I not content? Few indeed. Of all the thousands who have toiled in that torturing prison house have ever been, or are likely ever to be so content as I was. How true it is that happiness is altogether relative, and that it is divided much more evenly among men than we are willing to believe. A mere respite from an intolerable position, a single book to keep the mind from cracking, transformed gloom and misery into light and at least comparative happiness. After a time, I began to watch the effects of the unnatural life upon others. They arrived full of resolution, buoyed often by hopes which they were soon destined to find delusive. The short-time men, those with 7 or 10-year sentences, could face the prospect hopefully. To them the day would come when the prison gate must swing back and the path to the world be open once more. But no such hope cheers the long-timers, the men with 20 years in life, who quickly learn how great the proportion is of their number, who find relief only in the box smeared with black, which encloses what is left of them in the grave. Every day I used to see the effects on them of hunger and torment of mind. The first part visibly affected was the neck. The flesh shrinks, disappears, and leaves what look like 2 artificial props to support the head. As time wears on, the erect posture grows bent. Instead of standing up straight, the knees bulge outward as though unable to support the body's weight, and the man drags himself along in a kind of despondent shuffle. Another year or two and his shoulders are bent forward. He carries his arms habitually before him now. He has grown moody, seldom speaks to anyone, nor answers if spoken to. In the general deterioration of the body, the mind keeps equal step. And so unfailing is the effect that even warders wait to see it, and remark to each other that so-and-so is going off. When the sufferer begins to carry his arms in front, everyone understands that the end is coming. The projecting head, the sunken eye, the fixed, expressionless features are merely the outward exponents of the hopeless, sullen brooding within. Sometimes the man merely keeps on in that way, wasting more and more body and mind every day, until at last he drops and is carried into the infirmary to come out no more. Truly, I was looking on life from the seamy side. Before my own experience had taught me, I used to think at times, when such a subject ever came into my mind at all, what must be the thoughts and anticipations of a man condemned to separation from other men, to lead an unnatural life under the strained and artificial conditions of prison. The change is so violent, it comes so suddenly, the unknown possibilities are so terrible. The sufferings naturally implied are so inevitable, that had anyone gifted with a knowledge of futurity shown me that such experience was to be mine, I would have thought it utterly impossible that such horrors could be withstood by ordinary strength. The delights of pleasure are seldom equal to the anticipation of them, and it is probable that the pain of suffering is more unbearable in the shrinking expectation than when affliction actually opens her furnace door and commands us to enter. Perhaps there is a compensation of some kind in nature, a provision to deaden feeling when a death stroke falls, some merciful dispensation by which we fail to realize or to understand in its exactness the meaning of the stroke which is crushing us. The man rescued from drowning or from asphyxiation has felt no pain. The animal that falls beneath the rush and the murderous claws of a beast of prey seems to fall into a taupe-like indifference, under the influence of which he meets with no great suffering the death his captor brings him. Probably all great suffering comes accompanied with a reserve of strength or with a power of resistance which may even spring from weakness, but which invests the sufferer with courage, and perhaps, too, with hope to meet it. Transcribers note, but the pitiless application of a discipline designed with consummate skill to find out all the weak points of a man's inner armor, and to inflict the utmost possible suffering upon him. I used to ask myself if it could be possible that I was really the man upon whom so hideous a fate had fallen. The blackness of darkness was round about me. Infinite despair stood ready to seize me. It seemed an amazement that life should be forced to remain with him who longs for death, who would rejoice exceedingly and be glad could he find the grave. But when the first horrible numbness of the shock was disappearing, when the first glimmering perception came to me that, as a man's day so shall his strength be, I began to suspect, and soon to know, that in many ways the reality was not so terrible as imagination pictured it. However ample the provision be which men may make to inflict suffering upon other men, however well and successfully they may apply the provision, they cannot alter men's nature. That will assert itself under all circumstances. The fact that a man is restrained of his liberty by no means alters his nature. The things he liked or disliked when he was at liberty he will like or dislike when a prisoner, and he is not long in finding that whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap, is just as certainly true of the seed he plants in enclosed ground as it is of what he scatters in the open field. Chapter 96. The world inside of the walls has a public opinion of its own, and it is at least quite as often just as the public opinion whose sphere is not circumscribed by stone walls and iron bars. The man who accepts the situation, resolved to get his hand as easily as possible out of the tiger's mouth, soon becomes known as a sensible fellow, willing to give others no trouble and anxious to have no trouble given him. Such a man will rarely be molested. Patient, uncomplaining endurance always excites pity and sympathy. The most ignorant, the most brutal water will scarcely oppress the man who goes quietly and unresistingly along the thorny road stretched out before him, who, not taking the thorns for roses, is not disappointed at finding few roses among the thorns. Those, however, who are determined to see the rough side of prison life may easily do so. The appliances are there, and they will certainly be accommodated. An English prison is a vast machine in which a man counts for just nothing at all. He is to the establishment what a bale of merchandise is to a merchant's warehouse. The prison does not look upon him as a man at all. He is merely an object which must move in a certain rut and occupy a certain niche provided for it. There is no room for the smallest sentiment. The vast machine of which he is an item keeps undisturbed upon its course. Move with it, and all is well. Resist, and you will be crushed as inevitably as the man who plants himself on the railroad track when the express is coming. Without passion, without prejudice, but also without pity and without remorse, the machine crushes and passes on. The dead man is carried to his grave, and in 10 minutes is as much forgotten as though he had never existed. The plank bed, the crank, the bread-and-water diet, unauthorized but none the less effectual clubbing at the hands of warders, the cold in the punishment cells penetrating to the very marrow of the bones, weakness, sickness, and unpitied death are the certain portion of the rebel. Some are found idiotic enough to invite such a fate. Fewer now than formerly. The progress of education in England during the last 20 years and the philanthropic efforts of many societies and private persons, but above all the covert but successful efforts of the authorities to deport them to this country instantly after their release, have had an immense effect in thinning the ranks of prison inmates. The judges, too, have been forced by public opinion to be much less severe than they used to be, and that counts for much even in the inside of prisons. Nothing can be more capricious than the sentences they pass. In very few cases does the law set any limit. Life or any term not less than 5 years is the usual reading of the statute books, and the consequence naturally is that one judge will give his man 5 years, while another will condemn his to 20 years for precisely the same crime committed under precisely the same circumstances as the first one. Another great blot on the English judicial system is that no court of appeal exists to which a sentence might be referred for review, so that the most unjust and unequal sentences are constantly passed from which there is no appeal but in the forlorn hope, rather entire hopelessness, of a petition to the Home Secretary. I have often seen a man who had been sentenced to 5 years for murder working by the side of another whose sentence was 20 years for some crime against property. Such contrasts, of course, excite great discontent, and in some cases are the reason why men set up a hopeless resistance to what they feel to be persecution and injustice. It always seemed to me that the standpoint of the Board of Directors, established in 1864, and which continued without change until very recently, was altogether wrong. They appeared to think that in their dealings with other men the only course was to be the application of force, iron force, as one of the governors expressed it. The very great majority require no such application, and the few difficult ones could easily be managed in another way. Certainly it is necessary that all prison discipline be penal, but it is not necessary that it be ferocious and inhuman, as certainly is the English. Starvation, the crank, the plank bed, the fearful cold of the cells are not measures necessary in dealing with any man. Whatever they could think of to harden, to degrade, to insult, to inflict every form of suffering, both physical and mental, which a man could undergo and live, was embodied in the rules they made. Their prisons were to be places of suffering, and of nothing but suffering. So far as the directors were concerned, the regulations were carried out to the letter, but each prison is under the control of a resident governor, with a deputy governor to assist him. These gentlemen are always men of good social position, retired officers of the army, who have seen the world and have experience in controlling men. They are rarely inclined to unnecessary severity, but are generally willing to apply the rules with as much consideration as such rules admit. The governor's discretion, however, is limited, but daily contact more or less with men whom he sees to differ very little from free men, and whom he sometimes finds to be even better than many he knows who are not, but who perhaps ought to be on the wrong side of the bars, makes him unwilling to throw too many sharp points on the path which has to be trodden by men for whom he often cannot help feeling considerable sympathy. I have more than once heard governors express their disapproval of the starvation system and of the ferocity of treatment toward men who some day or other must go back to society. Under such governors, the new arrival speedily finds out that to a certain extent his comfort depends upon himself. No man can make a bad thing good or trick himself into believing that suffering is pleasure. If pain be not an evil, it is an exceedingly good imitation. And the wisest philosopher is just as restless under the toothache as the most perfect idiot. Pentonville Prison. Chapter 97. The inhabitant of a cell has a very rough row to hoe under any circumstance, and it has to be hoed, but there is no necessity for him to fill his row with stones and to plant roots in it himself. He soon finds his level, and the impression he makes on his arrival is the one which, as a rule, clings to him to the end. When prison air and prison influence have succeeded in encasing a man with the sort of moral hardbake that renders him callous to those feelings which at first so gall the raw spots, he finds himself watching with curiosity the shapings of newcomers. Some announce immediately on arrival that they cannot possibly be there more than a month or two. Their arrest was a mistake, and their uncle, the Member of Parliament, is now busily engaged making representations to the Home Secretary. One of the very few amusements prisoners have is in watching the important fellows, the men whose friends could do so much for them if they would only let them know where they are. Sometimes a chap who has perhaps been a body servant or something of the kind, who has picked up the kind of veneer he could catch by aping his master, will furnish food for smiles to everyone he comes in contact with during his stay. He never receives a letter without explaining confidentially to everyone that another aunt, whose favorite he was, has just died, leaving him £10,000 in cash, not to speak of a trifle or two in the shape of half a dozen houses. These gentlemen are immediately furnished with a name which becomes much better known than their own, and whenever they have delivered themselves of their periodical brooding of lies, the news goes smiling round that Billy Treacle's aunt has died again and left him another fortune. So long as their inventions do no more harm than make them ridiculous, they are only laughed at and let alone. But when one of them develops a talent for invention which molests or injures others, especially when it takes the form of confidential communication to the governor of what he sees, and still more of what he does not see, such retribution as both prisoners and officers can inflict is not long in falling. His row becomes filled with very sharp-edged stones indeed, and roots which tear his hands painfully. Nearly always these boastings are fathered by an absurd vanity, a desire ever to appear what they are not, and while they think they are deceiving others, they deceive no one but themselves. One case I remember, though, was an exception. One young fellow made such use of his invention, and the story is so interesting and instructive, as showing with what lofty respect English gentlemen are educated for the rights of property, that I shall relate it. 4 or 5 years after I went to Chatham, a young fellow named Frederick Barton arrived with a 10 years' sentence for forgery. His appearance and manners were very much in his favor, and his conduct so confirmed the good first impression that he speedily became a favorite with everybody from the governor down. Some 3 years had slipped by when one day he asked me if I would prepare a petition which he might send to the Home Secretary in the hope of obtaining a commutation of sentence. I liked the youngster very well and readily consented, but told him that I doubted very much if he would get anything. The petition was sent, and in a few days the usual answer was returned, no grounds. He told me of his ill luck, and I said to him, "Look here, so long as you send up whining petitions, asking for mercy, both you and they will be treated with contempt. If you wish to get that English gentleman in the Home Office to do anything for you, make him believe you are a millionaire. You will see whether he will do anything then for you or not." He laughed merrily at that. "A millionaire? Why, I haven't a sixpence. My father is only a private coachman at Tunbridge Wells." "That is nothing at all," I said. "If you will be guided by me and let me manage things for you, I will have a petition sent in for you from the outside. And I feel sure we can get you out." An idea had just flashed into my mind, and I was eager to try it. At first, he was a little timid about the venture, fearing that I might get him into trouble, but when he became convinced that I would do nothing of the kind, he consented. I had a warder in the prison who, in consideration of an occasional tip, used to act as my postman, sending my letters to my friends and bringing in theirs to me. This was a deadly offense against the rules, but as the permitted correspondence was outrageously limited, I saw no reason why I should deprive myself of letters when I had the chance to have them. And as I took good care that the great men in London should get no inkling of my misdeeds, I dare say their hearts did not grieve after what their eyes did not see. Chapter 98. My water friend supplied me with writing materials. I prepared one letter, which I had him copy, and another in my own handwriting. Both were directed to Barton, and informed him that his rich uncle had lately died, and had left him £160,000 in money and 16,000 acres of cotton land in India. He was also informed that his father had gone to India to look after the property, and that upon his return a petition would be presented to the Home Secretary, who it was hoped would grant his release. These two letters my warder sent to a friend of mine in London, with a note from me requesting him to post them immediately. I told Barton what I had done, at the same time cautioning him to guard the closest secrecy. 2 days afterward the letters arrived, and I directed my protégé to spread the news as much as possible, to tell all the warders he saw, and to show them his letters. We had at that time in the prison a wide-awake but tricky fellow named George Smith. He had been clerk to an important firm of auctioneers in London, and had been sentenced by probably the most savage judge on the bench, Commissioner Kerr, to 14 years' imprisonment for receiving a quantity of stolen silverware, which he had his employers sell for him. He was about to be released, and I determined to make use of him, but without letting him know the truth. For I knew that if he suspected he was merely doing a good turn for the chum he left behind him, he, like the Home Secretary himself, without the right kind of inducement, would have left his friend to stop where he was until the bottomless pit was frozen over hard enough to hold a barbecue on it. Barton, by my directions, told Smith of his good fortune, and that he hoped on his father's return to be liberated. Smith then did exactly what I expected and wanted him to do. He said there was no need to wait until then. He was going to be released in a few days, and if you like, I will send in a petition for you. It can't do you any harm, and it may get you released immediately. Barton at once accepted the offer, and told him that if successful, the post of manager on the Indian estate would be at his disposal. He also suggested to ask me to write the petition. Smith managed to see me in the course of the day, and, supposing me to have no knowledge of the matter, explained the situation and asked me to write the petition. Needless to say, I promised everything asked for, and added that I would make it my business to have the petition in London at some place where he could find it the day of his discharge. Banknote storeroom, Bank of England. Visitors at Newgate standing over the burying vault door leading to the Black Maria. The petition was prepared, setting forth all the interesting facts for the edification of the right honorable gentleman in the Home Office, and after being submitted to Barton and Smith, sent to the latter's address in London. Millbank is a gigantic prison in the heart of London, every one of the 1,000 cells of which cost the government £300 to build. This is the establishment where David Copperfield visited Mr. Uriah Heep when that gentleman was under a cloud, and heard him express the wish that everybody might get took up so that they could learn the error of their ways. For many years all London men whose sentences had expired were brought here for release, and here Smith came a few days after the petition was posted. On the morning of his discharge, and within an hour after passing through the gates of Millbank, he left the petition personally at the Home Office. 2 days afterward, one of the clerks acknowledged its receipt, accompanied with the gratifying assurance that it was under consideration. A week later, Mr. Smith was notified that the release would be granted. He immediately telegraphed the news to my warder, who told me, and I told Barton. 2 days more and the release came down. Barton went on his way rejoicing, and everyone was glad at his happy fortune. The only one who felt much disappointment was very likely poor Smith, who never heard of his friend again. School and a trade, or jail. Chapter 99. The successful issue of this little enterprise gave me great satisfaction. There was, of course, nothing in it for me, nor did I want anything, but it furnished me with an excellent standpoint from which to address the Home Secretary should the occasion ever arise. The occasion did arise some time after, and I utilized it in this way. A friend of mine had come over from America to see me, and to try if it were not possible to obtain some reduction in the sentence. My postman warder was away at the moment, so letter-carrier facilities were cut off. I wanted very much indeed to communicate with my friend, and applied to the Home Secretary explaining the position and asking him to let me write 2 letters immediately. At the end of 8 weeks, an answer came back that the Home Secretary had carefully considered the application and could find no sufficient grounds for advising Her Majesty to grant the prayer thereof. The next day I obtained a petition sheet from the Governor and wrote the following petition: to the Right Hon. Sir William V. Harcourt, Secretary of State for the Home Department, the petition of etc. humbly showeth that 2 months ago I petitioned the Home Secretary for permission to write 2 letters, explaining the urgency of the occasion and pointing out that the request was by no means unusual. Yesterday the answer arrived telling me, with as much truth, I have no doubt, as kindness, the anxiety with which the right honorable gentleman has been for 8 weeks considering the petition. I hasten to express to the Home Secretary the regret I cannot but feel at the thought of causing him so much concern, which I sincerely trust has had no prejudicial effect upon his health. I regret this the more as there was really no necessity for requiring 8 whole weeks of his time, to the inevitable great neglect of the public business. For no man who owns, or who is known to be able to get a half-sovereign ever, has the slightest difficulty in sending out as many clandestine letters as he chooses. This, of course, is an infraction of the rules, and any reasonable man would rather get along in a friendly spirit with the prison authorities than be at war with them. But when trifling favors which it requires but to stretch out the hand to take are refused, rules, prison authorities, and the Home Secretary himself are contemptuously set aside, and the forbidden favor taken. I trust that this knowledge will save the Home Secretary any repetition of the anxiety he has suffered on this occasion. But while regretting my want of success in petitions for myself, I desire to thank the right honorable gentleman for the kind attention he pays to my petitions for others. The Home Secretary will perhaps remember his merciful consideration of the case of Mr. Frederick Barton, whom he released some short time ago, but it will perhaps be news to him to hear that it was I who invented Mr. Barton's fortune, and wrote the petition which furnished the grounds for advising Her Most Gracious Majesty to extend her royal clemency to the deserving young man. The result of my petition by no means surprised me, for I was always confident that an English gentleman could never be guilty of the solecism against English customs, implied by keeping in prison a young gentleman who could perform so meritorious an act as to fall heir to many bags of gold and 16,000 acres of cotton land in India. Mr. Barton had previously petitioned for mercy, pointing out that he was but 17 years old at the time of his arrest, and asking that his extreme youth might plead for him. This petition the Home Secretary treated with very proper contempt, but it was really delightful to contrast that contempt with the respectful and instant attention shown to the petition of the young heir. I have a difficulty in expressing the comfort with which I saw an English Home Secretary, with all the power of the empire in his hands to protect him against imposition, releasing a criminal after reading a sheet of foolscap covered with lies, which had been left at the Home Office by a released convict within half an hour after passing through the gates of Millbank. It is but the merest justice, however, to add that poor Mr. Smith, the presenter of the petition, was as badly humbugged as the Home Secretary himself. The glitter of gold was flashed before his eyes, as it was before the eyes of Sir William Vernon Harcourt, and with equal effect. To me this effect was certain, as not the slightest doubt existed in my mind that the moment it became a question of great sums of money all distinctions would vanish and pickpocket and Home Secretary would scramble on to the same foothold. The result, it is unnecessary to add, perfectly justified me. As I watched the lucky Frederick set out to return to the stable, he came from it occurred to me that had he understood German, which he did not, nor English either, for that matter, he might have whispered joyfully to himself, in the words of another dealer in ways that are dark and tricks which are vain, "Es ist gar hübsch von einem großen Herrn, so menschlich mit dem Teufel selbst zu sprechen." Doubtless, however, the Home Secretary will feel, as I do myself, that he acted in this matter in accordance with the commonest dictates of duty, and I beg to assure him that, having every facility for sending out as many letters as I please, I shall never again cause him weeks of anxious consideration. Respectfully submitted, Austin Bidwell. Whatever Sir William Vernon Harcourt may have thought about the petition, he said nothing, but I dare say he did not feel flattered. It required no small daring to send it, but as I knew I had nothing to hope from him, I could look with perfect equanimity upon any consequences likely to follow. The governor of the prison did not dare to violate the regulations by refusing to send my petition, written as it was on an official form and duly entered on the books of the establishment, but he sent for me in hot haste. Assuming a threatening air, he demanded how I dared to play such monkey tricks. Officially, the governor was a hot member, and enforced an iron discipline both with wardens and the men, but personally he was not a bad fellow. So I merely laughed and asked him if he was a critic and reviser of petitions, therefore a local Home Secretary. He saw I was not to be intimidated, and almost begged of me not to do so any more. As he was a pretty good fellow and I had no wish to cause him any embarrassment, I readily promised, provided I was permitted now and then to write a special letter. This permission, he intimated, would not be withheld, and there, so far as the governor was concerned, the incident ended. But so unheard of a document emanating from a prisoner created a sensation among the officers, who all came to know of the matter, and added several degrees to whatever respect they were inclined to have for me. As there is no attempt at humor in this book, and since I am on the subject of petitions, I will give here a copy of one sent by a fellow prisoner who was somewhat of a character and whose name was Niblo Clark. To some of the prisoners, the art of reading and writing is an all but insoluble mystery. Every man is allowed a small slate, and many of the prisoners spend an incredible amount of painful toil and mental wrestling in preparing a petition, which, by the way, never does any good. Poor Niblo, for a whole year, through all the summer's warmth and winter's frost, spent his spare hours producing this petition, and I think my reader will agree with me that it is a masterpiece of its kind. Petition Register No. Y19. Name Niblo Clark, present age 40, confined in Chatham Prison. Date of petition January 15, 1890. Convicted. Crime, sentence. Remarks when 1880. Where? Old Bailey, London, burglary. 15 years. In hospital. Troublesome. To the Right Honorable Henry Matthews, Her Majesty's Principal Secretary of State for the Home Department. The petition of Niblo Clark humbly showeth. The Right Honorable Secretary, the great benefit your humble petitioner would derive by a speedy removal from this damp and foggy inhospitable climate to a milder one. The utmost for here is thoroughly prejudicial to your petitioner's health, and causes me to be a great sufferer. I am suffering from asthma, accompanied with bad attacks of chronic bronchitis, and have been now 3 long years confined to a bed of sickness in a sad and pitiable condition. And upon those clear grounds and physical proofs your petitioner humbly prays, that it may please the Right Honorable Secretary to order my removal. To a warmer and milder climate necessity also compels me to complain of repeated acts of injustice and cruelly committed against me, and which in some respects might justly undergo the imputation of ferocity. There are numbers and frivolous and false charges conspired against me, and every time I am discharged from here, the governor takes them separate one each, and tries to murder me. I have been no less than 6 weeks at one time on bread and water, accompanied with a little penal class, and all the officers are encouraged to practice all kinds of barbarous maltreatment against me and other sick men. There is one officer here placed here for the express purpose of tantalizing me, and other his name is Warden Newcomb. This officer, sir, has barbarously struck and assaulted patients on their sick bed, and several has complained of it to the governor. But I am sorry to say it's greatly fostered and encouraged especially upon me. It is quite useless to complain of anything to the governor. Right Honorable Sir, I humbly beg that you will listen to my woe for what I suffer in Chatham Prison. The one half you do not know from repeated attacks of this frightful disease. I am getting worse each day, so I humbly trust you will have me removed without the least delay in making my request in poetry. Sir, I hope you won't think I am joking, for the greatest favor you can bestow upon me is to send me back to Woking, for in this damp and foggy climate it's impossible to ever get better, so I humbly trust in addition to this you will grant me a special letter, another little case I wish to state. If you, sir, will kindly listen, as it would cause a vast amount of talk all round, and about the prison I mean. If Niblo Clark should be sent upon some public works, it would cause more talk than the late dispute between the Russians and the Turks. In foggy weather with my disease it would be impossible to last 1 hour, and if you doubt the accuracy of what I say, I refer to Dr. Power or any other naval doctor or one from the army garrison. They one and all would say the same, and likewise Dr. Harrison. Since my reception in this here prison, I have been a most unfortunate man, and I will tell you the why and wherefore, as well as I possibly can, for every time I been in this hospital it's the whole truth what I say. For my medical treatment, I assure, sir, I have dearly had to pay. A regular marked man I have been for them all. It's well known to Captain Harris, for the list of reports against me would reach from this place to Paris, so I humbly beg, Right Honorable Sir, you will grant this humble petition, for I am sorry to state I have nothing to pay, having lost both health and remission. Such cruel injustice to poor sick men is far from being just and right, but to report sick patients in hospital is the officer's chief delight. But perhaps, kind sir, you might imagine that they only do this to a dodger, but it's done to all, Austin Bidwell as well, and likewise to poor Sir Roger Tichborne. Like savage lions in this infirmary, the officers about are walking to catch and report a dying poor man for the frivolous charge of talking. And when we go out from hospital our poor bodies, they try to slaughter by taking these reports one at a time, and killing us on bread and water. I am suffering a chest and throat disease, a frightful chronic disorder, and to go out from hospital is attempting suicide to get heaps of bread and water. For it is such cruel treatment made me as I am, and brought me to the verge of the grave. So in conclusion, right honorable sir, a removal I humbly crave. If this petition should not be sent, prisoners abstain from further writing, who will explain his case more clearly to the visiting director. And I wish to have this petition submitted to the director by your truly humble servant Niblo Clark. Chapter 100. By a refinement of cruelty, we had been separated and sent to prison wide apart. For 20 years I had not seen the face of one of my friends, but there was an invisible bond between us that no tyranny could break. How blessed the happy forethought that made us, in that dark hour, amid our despair, make that promise. 10 years had slowly dragged by. 1883 came, and my devoted family felt that I and my comrades too had paid, as was right, our due to justice, and we ought to be liberated. They determined that it would not be their fault if I remained in captivity. So that year my sister came to England and remained permanently there. She worked bravely and well, but year after year passed without result. None of us was prepared for the vindictive fury of the Bank of England. Its power was all potent with the government. George had been bedridden for years and was slowly dying. At length, in 1887, the medical officer of the prison certified his speedy death was certain, and the government released him to die, but he resolved that he would not die until we were free. With liberty and hope, health came slowly back, and he devoted every hour to working for our liberation, but for a time devoted in vain. More than once had I seen the prison emptied and filled again. Of all the life prisoners I had met there on my arrival, or who for years after had joined me, I was the sole survivor. One by one, sickness or insanity, born of despair, had laid them in the prison graveyard or buried them in the asylum. Out of more than 70 life prisoners, none had lived to be liberated, and determined appeared the Bank of England directors that I should not form an exception, but that if ever the prison doors were open to me, it should be only when so near death that I might join the many who had gone before. My fate seemed inevitable, but never for a moment did I cease to believe that fortune's frowns would one day disappear, and that I should yet again feel the warmth and sunshine of her smile. From his sick bed and in his health, our comrade never ceased his efforts. He succeeded in interesting James Russell Lowell and many others in my behalf. The President asked the English government officially to grant my release. Mr. Blaine, the Secretary of State, sent a very strong letter through Minister Lincoln in London, and I thought when told of it that my day to go was not far away. It will interest Americans, perhaps, to hear that the representations of the President and of the Secretary of State of the United States met the same courtesy as was shown to all the previous ones. Still, George was not discouraged. He sent agents to England, who managed to interest the newspapers in the matter, and never did he cease until, by the statements of the press upon the ferocity of my treatment, the reproaches of my friends and the representations of many I had never seen, including Lady Henry Somerset, Mrs. Helen Densmore, then residing in London, and the Duke of Norfolk. At last the Home Secretary felt the pressure, and all unwillingly, much against his will, as he termed it, was forced to order my release. Thou shalt forget thy misery, and remember it as waters that pass away. 20 years had passed away since I had bade my friends good-bye under the Old Bailey, and now 1893 had come. It was a frosty February night, and I was alone in that little room with its arched roof and stone floor. It was past 7 o'clock, and the prison gloom and stillness had settled down on all the inmates, when suddenly there came the noise of hurrying feet that echoed strangely from the arched roof as the warders tramped loudly on the stone floor of the long hall. A rush of feet, or indeed anything that broke the horrible stillness at that hour, was startling. They were the feet of the reserve guard, which was never called in save when the patrol who glided around the corridors in slippered feet discovered some suicide. Many a heartbroken man had I known in that 20 years who in his despair ended his misery thus. While wondering who the unfortunate could be, I heard their steps mounting the stairway leading to my landing, and then a sudden thrill shot through me as they turned down the corridor toward my cell. My heart stood still as I thought, could they be coming for me? I had a sudden frenzy of fear that they might pass my door, but no, they came straight on, halted, and Ross, a principal officer, I had known him 20 years, gave a thundering rap on my door and shouted, "I want you." Then a key rattled in the lock, the door was thrown open, and 3 friendly faces looked in. Faint, deadly white, trembling like a frightened child, I started to my feet trying to speak, but no sound came from my lips for a moment. At last I stammered, "What's the matter?" Ross thrust his form through the door and with face close to mine said the thrilling words, "You're free." I cried, "I don't believe you." And Ross said, "Come on, my boy, it's all right." Like one in a dream, I passed out through the door of that little cell whose grim, narrow walls had frowned on me for a score of years and had in vain tried to crush my spirit. Still like one in a dream, I went down that long hall listening only to the strange sound of my own footsteps and saying to myself, "It is all a dream. I will awake, as I have from thousands of like dreams, and find myself again in my dungeon." I was led into the outer office, where some papers were read to me, and then others given me to sign, but I listened or signed like one in a maze. Suddenly I saw Ross thrust the key into the outer door. That roused me, and the thought flashed into my mind, now I will see a star. The heavy door rolled on its hinges, the ponderous gate was flung back. Stepping out, I intuitively looked up, and a sudden awe fell upon me, for there, like a revelation, shone the Milky Way, with its millioned arch of radiant suns. At the sight of that miracle of glory, my heart beat fast. I realized that I was free, with health and strength, with courage to begin again the battle of life, and in my irrepressible emotion I cried aloud, and my cry was like a prayer, "God is good." A 5-pound note, The Counterfeit Plate, by Austin Byron Bidwell. Updated editions will replace the previous one. The old editions will be renamed. Creating the works from print editions not protected by U.S. copyright law means that no one owns a United States copyright in these works, so the Foundation and you can copy and distribute it in the United States without permission and without paying copyright royalties. Special rules set forth in the general terms of use part of this license apply to copying and distributing project and may not be used if you charge for an e-book, except by following the terms of the trademark license, including paying royalties for use copies of this e-book. Complying with the trademark license is very easy. You may use this e-book for nearly any purpose, such as creation of derivative works, reports, performances, and research. Project Gutenberg e-books may be modified and printed and given away. You may do practically anything in the United States with e-books not protected by U.S. copyright law. Redistribution is subject to the trademark license, especially commercial redistribution. Start full license. Please read this before you distribute or use this work. Distribution of electronic works by using or distributing this work or any other work associated in any way with the phrase Project Gutenberg. You agree to comply with all the terms of the full www.gutenberg.org/license. Electronic works. Electronic work. You indicate that you have read, understand, agree to, and accept all the terms of this license and intellectual property, trademark/copyright agreement. If you do not agree to abide by all the terms of this agreement, you must cease using and return or possession. If you paid a fee for obtaining a copy of or access to by the terms of this agreement, you may obtain a refund from the person or entity to whom you paid the fee as set forth in paragraph 1. 8. Used on or associated in any way with an electronic work by people who agree to be bound by the terms of this agreement. There are a few, even without complying with the full terms of this agreement. See paragraph 1, see below. There are a lot of things you can do with Project Gutenberg electronic works if you follow the terms of this electronic works. See paragraph 1, below. Foundation or PGLAF owns a compilation copyright in the collection. Works in the collection are in the public domain in the United States. If an individual work is unprotected by copyright law in the United States and you are located in the United States, we do not claim a right to prevent you from copying, distributing, performing, displaying, or creating derivative works based on the work as long as works in compliance with the terms of this agreement. For keeping the comply with the terms of this agreement, by keeping this work in the you share it without charge with others. 1. D. The copyright laws of the place where you are located also govern what you can do with this work. Copyright laws in most countries are in a constant state of change. If you are outside the United States, check the laws of your country in addition to the terms of this agreement before downloading, copying, displaying, performing, distributing, or creating derivative works based on this work, or any representations concerning the copyright status of any work in any country other than the United States. 1. 1. The following sentence with active links to or other performed, viewed, copied, or distributed. This e-book is for the use of anyone anywhere in the United States and most other parts of the world at no cost and with almost no restrictions whatsoever. You may copy it, give it away, or reuse it under the terms at www.gutenberg.org. If you are not located in the United States, you will have to check the laws of the country where you are located before using this e-book, derived from texts not protected by U.S. copyright law does not contain a notice indicating that it is posted with permission of the copyright holder. The work can be copied and distributed to anyone in the United States without paying any fees or charges. If you are redistributing or providing access to a work with the phrase Project Gutenberg associated with or appearing on the work, you must comply either with the requirements of paragraphs 1, 1 through 1, 7 or trademark as set forth in paragraphs 1, 8 or 1, 9. With the permission of the copyright holder, your use and distribution must comply with both paragraphs 1, 1 through 1, 7 and any additional terms imposed by the copyright holder. Additional terms posted with the permission of the copyright holder found at the beginning of this work. License terms from this work, or any files containing a part of this one. 5. Do not copy, display, perform, distribute, or redistribute this electronic work, or any part of this electronic work, without prominently displaying the sentence set forth in paragraph 1. 1 with active links or immediate access to the full terms of the Project Gutenberg license. 1(6). You may convert to and distribute this work in any binary, compressed, mocked up, non-proprietary or proprietary form, including any word processing or hypertext form. However, if you provide access other than plain vanilla ASCII or other format used in the official www.gutenberg.org, you must, at no additional cost, fee, or expense to the user, provide a copy, a means of exporting a copy, or a means of obtaining a copy upon request of the work in its original plain vanilla ASCII or other form. Any alternate format must include the 1(7). Do not charge a fee for access to viewing, displaying unless you comply with paragraph 1(8) or 1(9). 1(8). 8. You may charge a reasonable fee for copies of or provided that you pay a royalty fee of 20% of the gross profits you derive from you, already used to calculate your applicable taxes. The fee is owed agreed to donate royalties under this paragraph to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. Royalty payments must be paid within 60 days following each date on which you prepare, or are legally required to prepare, your periodic tax returns. Royalty payments should be clearly marked as such and sent to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation at the address specified in Literary Archive Foundation. You provide a full refund of any money paid by a user who notifies you in writing or by email within 30 days of receipt that S/E license. You must require such a user to return or destroy all copies of the works possessed in a physical medium and discontinue works you provide. In accordance with paragraph 1, F3, a full refund of any money paid for a work or a replacement copy if a defect in the electronic work is discovered and reported to you within 90 days of receipt of the work. You comply with all other terms of this agreement for free. 1E9. If you wish to charge a fee or distribute a Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work or group of works on different terms than are set forth in this agreement, you must obtain permission in writing forth in section 3 below. 1. Effort to identify, do copyright research on, transcribe and proofread works not protected by U.S. copyright law in creating the project electronic works, and the medium on which they may be stored, may contain defects, such as but not limited to incomplete, inaccurate or corrupt data, transcription errors, a copyright or other intellectual property infringement, a defective or damaged disk or other medium, a computer virus or computer codes that damage or cannot be read by your equipment. 1F2. Limited warranty, disclaimer of damages except for the right of replacement or refund described in paragraph 1. F3. The Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, the owner of the Project Gutenberg trademark, and any other party distributing a Project Gutenberg trademark electronic work under this agreement, disclaim all liability to you for damages, costs, and expenses, including legal fees. You agree that you have no remedies for negligence, strict liability, breach of warranty, or breach of contract, except those provided in paragraph 1. F3. You agree that the foundation, the trademark owner, and any distributor under this agreement will not be liable to you for actual, direct, indirect, consequential, punitive, or incidental damages, even if you give notice of the possibility of such damage. 1. F3. Limited right of replacement or refund if you discover a defect in this electronic work within 90 days of receiving it. You can receive a refund of the money, if any, you paid for it by sending a written explanation to the person you received the work from. If you received the work on a physical medium, you must return the medium with your written explanation. The person or entity that provided you with the defective work may elect to provide a replacement copy in lieu of a refund. If you received the work electronically, the person or entity providing it to you may choose to give you a second opportunity to receive the work electronically in lieu of a refund. If the second copy is also defective, you may demand a refund in writing without further opportunities to fix the problem. 1. F4. Except for the limited right of replacement or refund set forth in paragraph 1. F3. This work is provided to you as is, with no other warranties of any kind, express or implied, including but not limited to warranties of merchantability or fitness for any purpose. 1. F5. Some states do not allow disclaimers of certain implied warranties, or the exclusion or limitation of certain types of damages. If any disclaimer or limitation set forth in this agreement violates the law of the state applicable to this agreement, the agreement shall be interpreted to make the maximum disclaimer or limitation permitted by the applicable state law. The invalidity or unenforceability of any provision of this agreement shall not void the remaining provisions. 1F6. Indemnity. You agree to indemnify and hold the foundation, the trademark owner, any agent or employee of the foundation, anyone accordance with this agreement, and any volunteers associated with the electronic works, harmless from all liability, costs and expenses, including legal fees, that arise directly or indirectly from any of the following which you do or cause to occur. A. Distribution of this defect you cause. Electronic works in formats readable by the widest variety of computers, including obsolete, old, middle-aged, and new computers. It exists because of the efforts of hundreds of volunteers and donations from people in all walks of life. Volunteers and financial support to provide volunteers with the remain freely available for generations to come. In 2001, the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation was created to provide a secure archive foundation and how your efforts and donations can help. See sections 3 and 4 and the Foundation information page at www.gutenberg.org. 501 c. 3. Educational corporation organized under the laws of the state of Mississippi and granted tax-exempt status by the Internal Revenue Service. The Foundation's EIN or Federal Tax Identification Archive Foundation, a tax deductible to the full extent permitted by U.S. federal laws and your state's laws. The Foundation's business office is located at 41 Watchung Plaza #516, Montclair NJ 07042, USA, +1 862 621 to 9288. Email contact links and up-to-date contact information can be found at the Foundation's website and official page at www.gutenberg.org/contact Literary Archive Foundation public support and donations to carry out its mission of increasing the number of public domain and licensed works that can be freely distributed in machine-readable form accessible by the widest array of equipment, including outdated equipment. Many small donations, $1 to $5,000, are particularly important to maintaining tax-exempt status with the IRS. The Foundation is committed to complying with the laws regulating charities and charitable donations in all 50 states of the United States. Compliance requirements are not uniform, and it takes a considerable effort, much paperwork, and many fees to meet and keep up with these requirements. We do not solicit donations in locations where we have not received written confirmation of compliance. To send donations or determine the status of compliance for any particular state, visit www.gutenberg.org/donate. While we cannot and do not solicit contributions from states where we have not met the solicitation requirements, we know of no prohibition against accepting unsolicited donations from donors in such states who approach us with offers to donate. International donations are gratefully accepted, but we cannot make any statements concerning tax treatment of donations received from outside the United States. U.S. laws alone swamp our small staff, methods, and addresses. Donations are accepted in a number of other ways, including checks, online payments, and credit card donations. To donate, please visit www.gutenberg.org/donate. Professor Michael S. Hart was the originator of the Project Gutenberg concept of a library of electronic works that could be freely shared with anyone. For 40 years, he produced and volunteer support editions, all of which are confirmed as not protected by copyright in the U.S. unless a copyright notice is included. Thus, we do not necessarily keep ebooks in compliance with any particular paper edition. Most people start at our website, which has the main PG search facility, www. Gutenberg, OG, Archive Foundation, how to help produce our new ebooks, and how to subscribe to our email newsletter to hear about new ebooks. Linked image back, linked image back.